Hello, Brother Monroe here, and welcome to a bit of a different video today. This is a complete beginner's guide to ship classes in Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. Most people, I think, coming to this game have an idea about different ship classes, what they can do, what they'll be good against, and things like that. But it's entirely possible that you just see cool ships fighting each other and you're like, I want to try that out. And you have no idea about any of that sort of thing. So if you are someone who already knows all this stuff, then feel free to go and watch one of my other videos. However, if you are a completely new player to the game, then welcome. And this is a guide intended for anyone to get into kind of Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts and what's going on. So there are various classes in Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts: battleships, battlecruisers, heavy cruisers, light cruisers, destroyers, and there are as well torpedo boats, transports. Transports you can neither build nor control in the current version of the game. I'm recording this on Alpha 10, so if you are watching this and you're on a later version, there may be changes. If there's serious changes, I will say so in the comments. There'll be a pinned post with any significant changes. But at the moment, you cannot build transports, and torpedo boats do not exist in the late game, and I'm going to talk about what they do in destroyers anyway. So let's start off with the smallest type of ship, and that is the destroyer. Now, destroyers can fulfill two roles. One is that of a torpedo boat. If you're playing early on in the game, you won't have access to destroyers. You only have access to torpedo boats. Because if I just get the AI to build me a destroyer, destroyers come with two weapon systems. They have to come with two weapon systems. One is their guns and one is their torpedo launcher. Now, a torpedo boat destroyer is focused on its torpedo tubes, and these are used to attack larger ships. All the way up to battleships. You can do a lot of damage to enemy ships with torpedo launchers. These things are not expensive. Again, I've gone for a late game tech here because it's the easiest reference point. It took about under $10 million for a ship like this that can pose a serious threat to something costing 10 times as much. The other thing destroyers are good at doing is killing other destroyers, and this is sometimes called a destroyer escort. Their guns being small, fast firing, the ship being small and maneuverable lets it avoid enemy torpedoes quite easily. These things are, pretty decent at killing other destroyers, and they're nice and cheap. They can make the enemy destroyers fire torpedoes at them, quickly dodge them, and then take out the enemy destroyer torpedo boat style ships quite easily. So destroyers can fill one of two roles, or you can build them to do both. You can build them with guns to, with an emphasis on their guns, so that they can take out other destroyers, fight through the enemy screens, and then deliver torpedo attacks on enemy capital ships. So that's kind of your base and your start. The other thing that they did historically was fighting submarines, but submarines are currently not in the game. There may well be submarines in the campaign mode, in which case destroyers will probably have a role on whatever strategic map layer arrives. But at the moment, they don't have an anti-submarine role. It's just anti-surface. Next up, we have the light cruiser. Now, as you can see, light cruiser is much bigger than a destroyer, but they actually fulfill a pretty similar role. This one is a pure gun light cruiser, which is fine. As you can see, they cost roughly twice as much. They come with some pretty large guns. You can equip them with up to 7-inch guns. They can carry a lot of them. They can carry a lot of secondary guns. They're still pretty fast. They're pretty maneuverable. These things are excellent at killing enemy destroyers before they get in range of anything more important. Because they're still fast, they're still maneuverable, they carry lots and lots of guns. They're very, very good at killing destroyers. They can also be, due to their speed and maneuverability, decent with torpedoes. And if you equip them with torpedoes as well, then they will be a threat to other cruisers and maybe capital ships. But because they are bigger, they are not as well equipped to get close to a say a battleship, because they're a bigger target and they're easier to hit. Worth noting, both light cruisers and destroyers are the only ships in the game currently that can lay down smoke screens. This is a really useful thing they can do, where you press a button during a battle, they billow smoke out of their funnel, and it makes them much harder to hit. So they are quite useful for that as well. But their main role for me is for killing enemy destroyers and protecting your bigger, more important ships. Next we have the heavy cruiser. Now, heavy cruisers are, wow, that was an interesting design the AI's come up with, are an absolute workhorse of a ship. They can do a multitude of different roles, and you can design them to do all sorts of different things in your fleet. They're very versatile. You can see the cost has jumped up quite a lot. This is a $50 million ship. You can easily push up towards 70. They can equip some rather large caliber guns, all the way up to 11 inch. Personally, I think they're best off with the 9-inch guns. They're still fast, they're still pretty maneuverable, so they can use torpedoes effectively, meaning these things can be built to be a threat to almost anything. They can also have, I'm going to go overweight here, but they can also have utterly insane amounts of armor, up to 25 inches, which puts these things can be armored as well as battleships. Their guns will make absolute mincemeat of enemy destroyers and light cruisers. They're a threat to other heavy cruisers as well, of course. And they can use their torpedoes to attack ships that are larger than themselves. So they're very, very useful ship class. Can be designed in lots of different ways. Very much a jack of all trades. And I imagine in the campaign these are going to be the kind of backbone of your fleet, because they really are capable of taking on anything. They'll have a decently long range, I'm imagining, in the game. I think they'll do quite well. Next up, we have the battle cruiser. Now, battle cruisers are a bit of an odd duck, and they're one of the few ship classes that can be built. Wow, that's a weird ship. Which can be built wrong, shall we say. So battle cruisers are supposed to be fast. This one's very fast at 37.5 knots. They can carry very big guns. This one has 15-inch guns, but they can have all the way up to 18-inch guns. So it can carry battle-class weaponry, battleship-class weaponry. They can carry an oodles of guns, as this one is ably demonstrating. And, you know, they're pretty expensive compared to your standard heavy cruiser. The problem comes with, if you pack this much firepower and speed into a package, then something is lacking. And in this case, it is armor. This is a pathetic amount of armor for a ship with this much explosives inside of it. And battle cruisers have a nasty habit of exploding. You can see the flash fire chance here, it's 4%. Battle cruisers can be built like this to be kind of lightly armored fast battleships, but I strongly recommend you don't do that, and instead you see them more as a large heavy cruiser. And in fact, some nations have a hull called a large cruiser, and these are basically supersized heavy cruisers with much more powerful guns, allowing them to basically threaten other heavy cruisers and be able to take out other heavy cruisers with ease, whilst being pretty well protected themselves. And that is kind of how I would see them. So battle cruisers are a pretty effective counter to if your opponent has a lot of heavy cruisers in their fleet. And I think that is going to be quite a common thing, that heavy cruisers kind of form the backbone of a fleet. A battle cruiser is a good way of countering that, because you can design them to be faster than a heavy cruiser, more heavily armed than a heavy cruiser, more heavily armored than a heavy cruiser, and they will be able to take them out. Just watch out for torpedoes. Do not send these things up against battleships. They really do struggle unless you really know what you're doing, and you have armored them up, and you have tried to take into account what would happen if it came across a battleship. But generally speaking, these things are bullies. They're very, very good bullies. Because they're big capital ships, they're able to operate independently, and they can attack a convoy and probably kill off anything in it, unless someone is using their battleships to escort their convoys, which hopefully they are not doing. A niche ship, I would say. I would guess that most of the time you're not going to need a battlecruiser, but you might find a use for them, or you might just not be able to afford battleships, and you just want to go for something slightly cheaper. So, for instance, this thing is 68 million compared to the 50 odd million for the heavy cruiser that we had, and this thing is much nastier. 13-inch guns, loads of secondaries, and much faster as well. So that's kind of how we use the bullies. Right, last but by no means least, we have battleships. That's what you came to the game for. Late game you get things like this, the modern battleship. Earlier on in the game you have access to dreadnoughts, and there are also pre-dreadnoughts as well. No matter what variety of battleship you're using, these are the pinnacle of ship that you can get in Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, although this is a disgusting one, so I'm going to get it to do a modern battleship. That looks a lot nicer. These things can fit huge numbers of guns. They can fit these quad guns. They can fit genuinely huge guns. They can fit these. This one can only fit 18 inches guns, but if you go for a super battleship, you can fit truly colossal weapons, such as the 19 and 20 inch guns, including quad 20 inch guns, which is the most firepower you can possibly fit. They have enormous weight limits, like 100,000 tons. They can be made fast. They can be made ultra durable with a ludicrous maximum armor of like 100 inch belt, which you'll never actually be able to manage. But battleship can have incredibly well protected vessels carrying massive armament at decent speed. These things are your dedicated capital ships, and they should form the kind of backbone of your fleet. You might not have very many, but these things are the most powerful warships you can build. And if you have a deficiency in battleships, you are in trouble. You need your ships to be able to take out enemy battleships. That's primarily what these things are for, is dueling with other battleships. Anything smaller that happens to stray into their sights is going to have a very bad time indeed. Do be aware though, because they are big and slow, but relatively speaking, especially these 100,000 ton monsters, you are vulnerable to torpedo strikes. So make sure you don't send these things out alone unless you know what you're doing. Make sure they've got some destroyers or some light cruisers or something to keep away pesky torpedo attacks. But otherwise these things can be made nigh invincible and dish out ungodly amounts of firepower and destruction on your enemies. Anyway, there we go. A brief overview of the different ship classes, what they can do, and how you can build them. Just a very, very brief introductory guide. As we get access to the campaign and things like this, I will do much more in-depth guides. I do have more in-depth guides on the various pre-dreadnought and dreadnought hulls, if you want to go and check those out. And I have more in-depth looks at how to build ships in Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts. Hope this has proved useful. Thank you very much for watching, and bye-bye.